It was Zohran's plan all along. Come out with communist policies that will drive New York landlords away. Nobody wants to own real estate because they fear that you'll seize it or overtax them. So they abandon the property. The property becomes worthless. And then Gen Z comes in, swoops it up, and they can afford homes. I don't really think that was his plan. I think the guy's an actual communist. But it is funny that it might work out like that. New York faces landlord exodus over Zohran Mamdani's housing plans. By simple threat of communism, the investors dip. There's economic damage, and then young people can afford to buy property because they're scared. It's almost like that video where the guy's like, here's how I keep the rent down, and he fires a gun into the air several times. Don't do that, by the way. It's not correct. It doesn't work that way. But anyway, Zohran's a communist. He's posted about communism. He's praised communism. He says, I'm a socialist, but come on, there's no difference. But he's got a plan, and it's resulting in landlords fleeing. Newsweek reports Zohran Mamdani's stunning victory in New York City's mayoral primary race has blindsided local landlords and real estate professionals who poured millions into Cuomo's campaign, hoping to stop the young left-wing candidate's ascent. Now they're scrambling to block the 33-year-old state politician from City Hall, where the self-described Democratic Socialist is likely to keep his promise to freeze rent for over 2 million New Yorkers and reform the city's tax system to make richer and wider neighborhoods pay more. 2/3 of New Yorkers rent their homes in what is one of the most expensive markets in the country. About 44% of all rental units in the city are rent stabilized, which means that there are limits to how much landlords can raise rent each year. In the city's free market, on the other hand, landlords can increase rent by how much they see fit. Let's talk about the problems that are currently underway in New York. It's not just New York. Any location with rent stabilization is in trouble. See, we got a fiat garbage economy. It don't work. This will happen. If you can't save, everybody always needs more money because everything's always becoming more expensive for no reason other than the government extracts from the market without producing. Welcome to fractional reserve banking. So here's what happens. The U.S. government prints money, spends that money, but doesn't contribute to the economy. So that means the amount of resources available to the people who are working is lower than it should be, so everything starts to cost more. I'm simplifying it, but that's basically what's happening. So here we go. You've got a guy, and he's a contractor who renovates apartments. After a tenant leaves, you've got to do some work, and you got to maintain it while they're living there. That costs money. You want to have a big apartment like New York's got these big buildings? You need a superintendent, someone who's got to live, like they usually live in the building, and then when you have problems, you can tell them so they can get taken care of. A company, sometimes they just send people out depending on the size of the building. But I've lived in a couple different, I lived in one building with 6 units. It was like a narrow building. It had a front unit, back unit, and it had 4 floors. It was 8 units, actually. No superintendent on site. You had a company you had to call, and they were like a mile away to send somebody out. I also lived in a building where it had, I think, like 40 units, and the super lived on the first floor. It was a garden basement apartment. They're awful, but he lived there for free, and his job was anytime a tenant had a problem, they'd bring it to him, and then he would facilitate taking care of that problem. With rent stabilization, someone rents a property, and let's say it's $1,500 a month. Rent stabilized, I don't know. In New York, the average is $3,000, but depending on where you can be, let's say it's 15. Or let's just say it's $3,000, I guess. That rent, the property owner is not going to make a massive margin on it. The margin is going to be super narrow. It's going to be a couple percent. It could be high as 5 to 10%, maybe. But what that 5 to 10% off the top goes to is going to be additional staffing for the entire company. So one of the places I lived in, my landlord was a company. A company owned several buildings. So when I paid rent, I went in person, and it was an office with receptionists, and there wasn't a landlord. The company owned the property. So I paid rent. They filed it and said, thank you, have a nice day. This is a really funny story. They knew I was paying rent, and then I went, I think it was when I went to Ukraine for Vice. When I came back, the apartment was rented out. And fortunately for me, I own very little. And I was like, hey, I live here, and the locks were changed. And I was like, so that was pretty wild. But it was all right. It didn't matter because I was actually in the process of renting another place as it was, and actually already had the keys to the new place. But I digress. If you can't raise the rent because of the government, you then go to a contractor and say, I need you guys to fix and maintain this. They say, okay, it's going to cost X dollars. You say, I can't afford that because I can't rent the property out for more than $3,000 because it's rent stabilized. And they say, okay, then what do? Nothing. Don't rent it out. It's better and cheaper to keep the property empty and write off the loss on your taxes because you can't rent it out due to rent stabilization, helping to contribute to the high prices Now there's less available apartments because they can't rent it out. So the prices for other apartments go up where it's not rent stabilized. The company's going to make back its profits somewhere else. These people are morons. Then, let me tell you, I own property, and I've got a commercial property with some tenants, and they are amazing. Always on time, no complaints, and we're always saying, like, we got you. I have had tenants before, miserable. Things kept breaking, they kept calling, and we were like, look, we try to accommodate you, but sometimes it's not easy to do. It's a full-time job, and I said, listen, I don't want to be a landlord. I owned a property. I wasn't using it, and I said, maybe we should rent it out. We rented it out. And then I said, being a landlord is not something I ever wanted to do. So I sold the property to them. I said, you guys buy it and it's yours. I'm not trying to be your landlord. Okay. I just don't live there. And so they were excited for it. I got no beef. They had issues. They had problems, whatever it may be. And they said, it's your responsibility as a landlord. I said, I don't want it to be my responsibility. I'm selling it. Being a landlord is not some easy thing. You'd be a slumlord and just laugh and say, good luck, sue me, But, you get in trouble. Some people want to be slumlords. The point is, Zohran Mamdani and the communist plays and plans that they have for New York City are going to cause the people who run the housing market to leave. And what you're going to end up with is slumlords. You're going to end up with derelict property, squatters, and then who's going to pay to repair it? When people stop renovating and renting out properties because of the rent control, squatters take it, and the owner goes, whatever, I don't know. It's kind of better that someone's in there, even if it is bad, sometimes, depending on if you know who they are. And then you could even be like, give me something, I guess. But we can't rent it out because it's not up to code, and we can't pay to get up to code because it's rent stabilized, and the amount we can charge for rent isn't going to cover the cost of fixing it. So we leave it empty. Then you get squatters, then you get crime, then you get drugs. Ask Pruitt, I go. This is what they are building in New York City. I say, Donald Trump, federalize whatever powers you have. They say, even in the rent stabilized market, renters are struggling to keep up with the cost of housing, which has risen all across the country since the pandemic. What I can't stand, leave, dude. This is the human condition, man. If people in New York just said, you want me to work at Starbucks? Okay, well, my rent is $3,000. Starbucks going to be like, we ain't paying you that much. Then I'm working here. Bye. And so what happens is you get people who illicitly, maybe not, that's not the right word, but under the table, without notifying the landlords, they'll cram 5 people in a 1-bedroom and they'll bunk. And you can't, it's typically not legal. I don't know what the laws are. Fire hazard code stuff, occupancy stuff. But then everybody splits the bill a couple $100 and then they go and work these low wage jobs. Imagine what would happen if they said, no, I need to have my own studio. If you want me to work at Starbucks, I need to at least make $12,000 a month. And they're going to go, what, $12,000 a month to work at Starbucks? Well, yeah, rent is $3,000 and it's supposed to be a quarter of my income. Not to mention, I'm giving a third to taxes already. So I'm taking home only about $8,500 or $9,000. It's probably going to be $9,000. And then I got to pay $3,000, leaving you with $6,000 for expensive bills, healthcare, clothing, etc. And they're going to say, I ain't paying you that much. Okay, fine, half. At least then. If I take home $5,000, I'll have $2,000 per month for everything else. They say no, and they pay substantially less than that. So what people end up doing is they get crappy shared apartments, but imagine what would happen if they just said no. Starbucks would be like, we can't open. Sorry. Or $7, $8 per coffee. And if you want the coffee, that's the reality. That's market economics. The ultimate problem I see is fractional reserve banking creates this imbalance. The free market largely would solve for this. Coffee would cost what it costs. Businesses would exist where they exist. And it is typically the interference of regulation in stupid ways that causes these imbalances and fractional reserve banking. That being said, I am not a laissez-faire capitalist. I think there should still be some regulations like don't sell turpentine and call it coffee. Don't swindle people and commit fraud. And sometimes there's civil infractions or otherwise, but I'm okay with certain regulations. But in places like New York, it is nuts. If Zohran Mamdani wants to play these games, they say, according to data published last year by Brad Lander, hey, look at that. A majority of renting households in the city are rent burdened. Yup. They need to make more money. But what happens is the government comes in to subsidize the rent with stabilization, creating a further destabilization. It's like putting a bandage in a bullet wound. People are like, I can't afford to live here. Well, the company's got to pay you more money to live here then. They don't want to pay me more money to live there, and I can't find another job. Okay, the government will subsidize the cost of that apartment. Then the guy who owns the building says, you're not subsidizing, you're just forcing them to not have to pay me money, but I can't afford to fix the apartment, so screw it, I'm not renting it to anybody. And then the market collapses. Now you get this communist who wants to exacerbate that problem, and what's going to happen? It's going to get a lot worse. Landlords will flee, housing will start to fall apart, and you will get a Detroit living scenario. Congratulations, New York, that's where you're going. I'm not going to pretend like I have all the solutions, but I can certainly tell you communism ain't one of them. I'm going to wrap it up there. Smash the like button, share the show, follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. Go to dccomedyloft.com. Search the events, live, in person, Timcast, funny, crazy. Got to be there. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you on the next segment.